I never imagined that a medical condition I'd known about since I was 16 would become the weapon that would destroy my entire life. My name is Sarah, and this is the story of how my future mother-in-law's cruel words and manipulation tore apart a love that had lasted 23 years. I'm 32 years old now, standing at an impressive 6 feet tall, which has always made me stand out in a crowd. People often ask if I play basketball, and I've learned to smile politely while explaining that no, I don't, and yes, the weather is indeed fine up here. My height was just one of many things that made me different, but it was the one difference I couldn't see that would ultimately matter the most. When I was diagnosed at 16, the doctors explained it to me gently. I have all the right parts, they said, but they don't function the way they should. My uterus cannot generate the lining necessary for pregnancy. On the bright side, if you can call it that, I've never experienced a period in my life. No monthly cramps, no unexpected surprises, no carrying tampons in my purse just in case, but also no possibility of ever carrying a child. Michael and I met when we were just 9 years old. It was one of those perfect childhood moments that you look back on with a smile. My family had just moved from France to a small town in Ohio. My father was French, my mother American, and they'd met when she was working abroad. We'd lived in Lyon for the first 9 years of my life, and suddenly everything was different. New country, new language that I was still mastering, new school where everyone looked at me like I was some exotic creature. The day we moved in, a boy and his mother appeared at our door with a basket of homemade chocolate chip cookies. The mother, Patricia, was all smiles and Midwestern warmth. The boy, Michael, stood slightly behind her, peering at me with curious hazel eyes. While our mothers chatted about the neighborhood and local schools, Michael and I ended up in the backyard, where he showed me the best climbing tree and warned me about which neighbors had mean dogs. That was the beginning of everything. We grew from friends to best friends to something more. By high school, everyone knew we were a couple. We went to prom together, graduated together, chose the same college together. It wasn't codependency, it was simply that life was better when we were side by side. We understood each other in a way that made words almost unnecessary sometimes. A glance across a crowded room could convey entire conversations. When I told him about my diagnosis at 16, we were sitting in his beat-up Honda Civic in the parking lot of the local ice cream shop. I'd just come from the specialist, and my eyes were still puffy from crying. He held my hand while I explained what the doctors had said, stumbling over the medical terms, my accent becoming thicker with emotion as it always did when I was upset. He was quiet for a long moment after I finished. Then he squeezed my hand and said, "Okay, so we'll adopt someday, or get a surrogate, or just have a bunch of dogs. Whatever makes you happy, Sarah." That was Michael, practical, loving, and completely unfazed by obstacles that would send other teenage boys running. We were 16 years old, and he was already thinking about our future together as if it was the most natural thing in the world. College was a blur of late-night study sessions, coffee-fueled mornings, and stolen moments between classes. We got an apartment together junior year, scandalizing his mother who believed unmarried couples shouldn't live together. But Michael stood firm. One of the many times over the years he chose our relationship over his mother's opinions. After graduation, we both found jobs in the same city. I worked in marketing for a tech company, and he became an engineer at a manufacturing firm. We settled into adult life with the same ease we'd done everything else. Our apartment became a home, filled with inside jokes, shared memories, and dreams for the future. People often asked when we were getting married. The truth was, it had never felt urgent. We were committed to each other completely. A piece of paper from the state wouldn't change that. We'd talked about it occasionally, usually in casual conversation. "Pass the salt. Do you think it'll rain today? Should we get married?" That sort of thing. But then my father got sick. Papa had always been the picture of health. He ran marathons, ate a Mediterranean diet before it was trendy, and had the energy of a man half his age. When he started losing weight and feeling tired all the time, we assumed he was just working too hard. The diagnosis hit our family like a sledgehammer. Pancreatic cancer, already advanced. The doctors gave him months, maybe a year if we were lucky. One evening, as I sat by his hospital bed, he took my hand in his. His fingers, once so strong, felt fragile as bird bones. "Ma petite," he said, using the nickname he'd called me since I was small, despite my height. "I have a wish." Anything, Papa. I want to walk you down the aisle. I want to see you in a white dress, with flowers in your hair, walking toward the man who loves you. I want that memory to carry with me. How could I say no to that? I couldn't. When I told Michael that evening, he immediately agreed. "Let's do it," he said. "Let's give your dad that memory." That weekend, we went to his parents' house. The plan was simple. Michael would ask for his grandmother's ring, a family heirloom that had been passed down for generations. His mother had often mentioned it over the years, usually with pointed looks in my direction. I waited in the car while he went inside. Through the window, I could see Patricia's animated gestures, her face lighting up with joy. She actually ran upstairs, something I'd never seen her do in all the years I'd known her. When she came back down, she was holding a small velvet box and wiping tears from her eyes. Then Michael must have told her about my condition. I couldn't hear the words, but I watched her face transform. The joy drained away like water from a broken cup. Her mouth opened and closed several times, like a fish gasping for air. Then she snatched the ring box back and stormed upstairs, leaving Michael standing in the living room looking shell-shocked. He came back to the car slowly, his shoulders slumped in a way I'd never seen before. "She said no," he told me quietly. "She said there's no point in marriage without children." I should have seen it then. I should have recognized the first crack in the foundation of our life together. But I was focused on my father, on making his last months as peaceful as possible. I assumed Patricia would come around. After all, she'd known me for 23 years. I'd eaten Sunday dinners at her table, helped her decorate Christmas trees, been there when her father passed away. Surely how in all— "Patricia," I started, but she cut me off. "Don't you dare call me by my first name. I'm nothing to you, and you're nothing to my son. I'm going to make sure everyone knows what you are. No one from our family will attend any wedding. You're a barren woman trying to steal my son's future grandchildren from me." She hung up before I could respond. I stood in the hallway, phone still pressed to my ear, trying to process what had just happened. A coworker found me there 10 minutes later, tears streaming down my face. When I told Michael that evening, he was furious. "She had no right," he said, pacing our living room like a caged tiger. "I'll talk to her. I'll make her understand." But Patricia had already begun her campaign. Over the next week, I received messages from various members of Michael's extended family. Some were supportive, like his Aunt Linda, who wrote, "Patricia told me about your medical situation and asked me not to attend the wedding. I told her she was being ridiculous. You have my full support, sweetheart." But others were less kind. One cousin asked why we didn't just break up and find other people. An uncle suggested that maybe Patricia had a point about the grandchildren. The worst was when Patricia apparently told people that there was no point in me having breasts since I'd never nurse a baby. The cruelty of it took my breath away. Michael's father, Robert, called me privately. "I'm ashamed of my wife," he said quietly. "You're like the daughter I never had, Sarah. Michael is lucky to have you. Don't let her poison win." But poison has a way of seeping into everything it touches. The Tuesday night confrontation was scheduled like a business meeting. Robert and Michael would sit down with Patricia and try to talk sense into her. I offered to come, but Michael thought my presence would make things worse. "Let me handle my mother," he said, kissing my forehead. "By tomorrow, this will all be sorted out." I spent that evening at home, trying to distract myself with television while our cat, Duchess, curled up on my lap. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart jumped. But there were no updates, no messages saying how things were going. When Michael finally came home after midnight, I knew immediately that something was terribly wrong. His face was different somehow, harder. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "How did it go?" I asked, though I already feared the answer. "We need to talk," he said, and those 4 words changed everything. He sat on the opposite end of the couch, as far from me as possible. The distance felt like miles. "I've been thinking," he began, and his voice was strange, formal. "Maybe my mother has a point. I do want children. Biological children. My own blood." I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. This had to be a joke. A cruel, horrible joke. "Michael, we've talked about this for 16 years. You said adoption was fine. You said—" I changed my mind. The words came out sharp, cutting. If you can't give me children, then maybe we shouldn't get married." "That sounds like your mother talking, not you," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the earthquake happening inside me. His face flushed red. "I can speak for myself, Sarah. I'm not some puppet. This is what I want." "Since when?" I stood up, Duchess meowing in protest as she tumbled from my lap. "Since when is this what you want? Last week you were ready to marry me. Last week you were asking for your grandmother's ring. What did she say to you?" "It doesn't matter what she said. This is my decision." "Your decision?" I laughed, but it came out harsh and bitter. "You haven't made your own decisions since the day your mother found out about my condition. Suddenly, the woman I've loved since I was 9 years old isn't good enough because my uterus doesn't work? Do you hear how insane that sounds?" "Don't call me insane." "I'm not calling you insane. I'm saying this situation is insane. We had plans, Michael. We had solutions. Your best friend Paul's wife even offered to be a surrogate if we needed one. We've researched adoption agencies. We've talked about fostering, but now, none of that matters because Mommy says so?" The argument escalated from there. 23 years of love and partnership devolved into a screaming match that had our neighbors banging on the walls. We said things designed to hurt, weapons forged from intimate knowledge of each other's deepest insecurities. He called me cold and unnatural. I called him a mama's boy who would never grow up. He said maybe his mother was right about me being defective. I said maybe I was better off without a spineless partner. That last one made him step back as if I'd slapped him. In the sudden silence, I grabbed my overnight bag and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" he asked, and for a moment he sounded like the boy who'd shown me the climbing tree all those years ago. "My parents' house," I said without turning around. "I can't look at you right now." The drive to my parents' house was a blur. Muscle memory guided me through familiar streets while my mind tried to process what had just happened. How did 23 years end in a single evening? How did the person who knew me best in the world suddenly see me as defective? My mother was waiting up, somehow knowing I would need her. Mothers always know. She didn't ask questions, just wrapped me in her arms and let me cry until I couldn't cry anymore. My father, weak as he was, came downstairs and stroked my hair like he did when I was small. "Ma petite," he whispered. "What has happened?" I told them everything. My mother's face grew increasingly angry as I spoke, while my father just looked sad. When I finished, he said, "A man who lets his mother dictate his heart is no man at all. You deserve better, my darling girl." I called in sick the next day. And the next. Lay in my childhood bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand how my life had imploded so completely. 23 years. More than 2 decades of love, friendship, shared dreams, inside jokes, whispered secrets, passionate nights, lazy Sunday mornings, holiday traditions, family vacations, career celebrations, mutual support through every challenge life threw at us. Gone. Because his mother decided I was defective. The rational part of my brain knew I should be angry, furious, but all I felt was numb, like someone had reached inside me and turned off all the switches. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, I just existed, floating in a strange space between denial and devastation. On the 3rd day, my father sat on the edge of my bed. He was having a good day, the pain manageable, his mind clear. "You're going to waste away if you keep this up," he said gently. "I don't know how to do this, Papa," I admitted. "I don't know how to live without him. He's been part of my life longer than he hasn't been. I don't remember how to be just Sarah, not Sarah and Michael." "Then, perhaps," he said slowly, "it's time to discover who Sarah really is. On her own, without anyone else's definitions or limitations." That conversation planted a seed, a tiny thought that began to grow. My mother had family in France still. I had dual citizenship. I spoke fluent French. Maybe what I needed was distance. A complete change. A chance to rebuild myself from the ground up, without the constant reminders of a life that no longer existed. When I mentioned the idea to my parents, my mother immediately started making plans. "My sister in Lyon has been asking when you'd visit. She has that spare room. You could stay with her while you get settled." It seemed drastic. It seemed like running away. But what was left for me here? Every street corner held a memory. Every restaurant was somewhere we'd eaten together. Even my apartment still smelled like his cologne. How could I heal when I was swimming in reminders of what I'd lost? I returned to work the following Monday with a resignation letter. My boss was shocked but understanding. "Take care of yourself, Sarah," she said. "Sometimes a fresh start is exactly what we need." Word traveled fast in our small city. By lunch, a dozen roses appeared on my desk with a note in Michael's familiar handwriting. "I'm sorry." 2 words. 23 years, reduced to 2 words. I gave the roses to a coworker and threw the note in the trash. That evening, as I was packing up my desk, Paul called. Michael's best friend since childhood, he'd been part of our lives forever. His wife Emma and I had become close over the years. "I heard what happened," he said without preamble. "It's bullshit, Sarah, complete bullshit. Michael's lost his mind." "Has he?" I asked. "Or is he finally showing who he really is?" Paul sighed. "This isn't him. You know it isn't. Patricia's gotten into his head somehow. She's been working on him for days, apparently, telling him he'll regret not having biological children, that he'll resent you eventually, that he deserves a whole woman. It's sick." "It worked, though, didn't it?" I said bitterly. 23 years, and all it took was a few days of Mommy whispering poison in his ear. "Emma and I are here for you," Paul said. "Whatever you need, even if you're leaving for France. Especially if you're leaving for France. Sometimes distance is the only cure." The next few weeks passed in a blur of preparations. I gave notice at work, agreeing to stay long enough to train my replacement. I started the process of selling the apartment Michael and I had shared. I sorted through possessions, dividing 23 years of accumulated life into keep, donate, and trash piles. The hardest parts were the photos. Thousands of them, documenting our journey from children to adults. Birthday parties, graduations, vacations, random Tuesday evenings when the light was pretty and one of us grabbed a camera. I couldn't bring myself to throw them away, but I couldn't look at them either. Finally, my father offered to store them in his attic. "You may want them someday," he said, "when the wound isn't so fresh." Michael tried to contact me several times. He came to my parents' house, but I refused to see him. He sent more flowers, which I gave away. He wrote letters, which my mother screened for me. According to as if she's live your as it they were a Paul it wasn't. Then Paul, is that what? And then she'd gone. And now the off. When you're drowning, you grab any life preserver available, even if it means swimming to a different shore. The 2 weeks after my last day of work were dedicated to saying goodbye. I visited somewhere my father if look for closure. The fact that he would ask that, with my father standing right there, was so shocking that I almost laughed. Instead, I grabbed my chest through my sweater and said loudly, "You are never going to see these, touch these, or play with these again. Or anything else. Ever." He turned bright red and practically ran out of the house. My father, who had maintained his death glare throughout this exchange, suddenly burst out laughing. Real, genuine belly laughs that left him gasping for breath. "I can't believe you just did that," he wheezed when he could speak again. "Neither can I admitted, feeling my own face burn with embarrassment. I had essentially groped myself in front of my father. We looked at each other and started laughing again, the kind of hysterical laughter that's equal parts humor and emotional release. That night at dinner, my mother asked an innocent question about my friend Marie's husband's job in Lyon, and I completely lost it. All the emotion I'd been holding back for weeks came pouring out in great, gulping sobs. My father, weak as he was from his treatments, picked me up like he used to when I was 5 and carried me to bed. "Tell Mom it wasn't her fault," I managed to say through my tears. I needed to let it out." He tucked me in and kissed my forehead. "She knows, ma petite. We all need to break sometimes. It's how we know we're human." The next morning, a coworker called to tell me Michael had shown up at my old office with another bouquet of roses and a letter. Security had turned him away, explaining I no longer worked there. Then, according to another friend, he'd driven to the airport in Cedar Rapids, apparently thinking that's where I'd be flying from. He didn't know my parents were driving me to Chicago for a direct flight. What did he think would happen? That he'd make some grand romantic gesture at the airport and I'd forget everything? That I'd drop my bags and run into his arms like a movie? The Michael I'd known would never have done something so dramatically pointless, But then, the Michael I'd known wouldn't have chosen his mother over me either. More letters arrived at my parents' house. My mother read one aloud before I asked her to stop. Even with her censoring the more inappropriate parts, it was clear Michael was spiraling. The letters veered wildly between desperate apologies, angry accusations, and graphic reminiscences about our intimate life that made me grateful my mother hadn't read those parts aloud. "He's grieving," my mother said, setting the letter aside. "Badly, but still grieving. People do strange things when they realize what they've lost." "He didn't lose anything," I corrected her. "He threw it away. There's a difference." A few days before I left, Paul's wife Emma invited me for dinner. It was a bittersweet evening, full of carefully avoided topics and forced cheerfulness. Halfway through dessert, Emma mentioned that Michael had been fired from his job. Not for anything he'd done, but because the company was being sold and liquidating its workforce. They'd known it was coming for a year, but Michael had apparently done nothing to prepare. "He's not handling any of this well," Emma said quietly. "Patricia's been telling anyone who'll listen that you've ruined his life, that you've put some kind of curse on him. It's insane." "She always has to be the victim," I said. "Or make him the victim. Nothing is ever their fault." "Robert filed for divorce," Paul added. "Said he couldn't stand to look at her anymore after what she did to you two. The whole family is choosing sides. It's a mess." I thought about the ripple effects of Patricia's cruelty. A divorce, a broken family, my relationship destroyed, my life uprooted, all because she couldn't accept that her son loved a defective woman. My last night in America was spent with my parents. We ordered Chinese takeout and looked through old photo albums, pictures of my first day of American school, looking terrified and too tall for my age. Michael appearing in more and more photos as the years went on. Prom pictures, graduation, college move-in day, our whole life together documented in glossy prints. "Do you want to take any of these?" my mother asked gently. I shook my head. "Not yet. Maybe someday, when it doesn't hurt to look at them." The next morning, March 1st, my parents drove me to Chicago. The 4-hour drive felt both endless and too short. At the airport, my father held me tight despite his frailty. "Live your life, ma petite," he whispered. "Live it fully and without regret. Find joy again. Promise me." "I promise, Papa," I said, knowing it was a promise I had no idea how to keep. The flight to Lyon was 10 hours of strange liberation. With every mile we flew, I felt the weight on my chest lighten just a little. The elderly woman next to me was terrified of flying, gripping my arm with surprising strength every time we hit turbulence. She was going to visit her son in Frankfurt, she told me between white-knuckled moments. She apologized repeatedly for holding my arm so tightly. "It's okay," I assured her. "Sometimes we all need someone to hold on to." Later, I would discover her grip had left bruises, but I didn't mind. It felt appropriate somehow. I was leaving America marked by the journey, carrying physical evidence of transition along with the emotional scars. My Aunt Marie met me at the airport in Lyon, enveloping me in a hug that smelled of lavender and fresh bread. "Ma chérie," she said, stepping back to look at me. "You look terrible. Come, I will feed you and you will tell me everything." The drive to her apartment was surreal. Lyon was familiar yet foreign, like a dream half remembered. I'd visited many times over the years, but always as a tourist. Now I was coming home, or trying to find home, or running from home. I wasn't sure which. Marie's apartment was exactly as I remembered it. Bright and airy, filled with plants and books, and the smell of something delicious always cooking on the stove. The spare room was small but welcoming, with a window that looked out onto a tree-lined street. "This is yours for as long as you need it," Marie said. "No pressure. No timeline, just heal." The first few weeks were a blur of administrative tasks, setting up a bank account, registering with various offices, updating my resume, reaching out to professional contacts. I had 3 job interviews scheduled, but they were all postponed when the world suddenly shifted into lockdown. COVID-19, which had seemed like a distant problem when I left America, was suddenly everywhere. Instead of job hunting, I found myself tutoring Marie's children in English. At 10 and 12, they were eager to practice with a native speaker, even if that native speaker had a slight French accent when she was tired. We turned it into a game, with me teaching them American slang while they updated my French with current expressions I'd missed. It was during one of these lessons that Marie's phone rang, my mother calling with an update I hadn't asked for but probably needed to hear. Michael had completely fallen apart. After losing his job, he'd spent his days sitting in my parents' front yard. Just sitting, not doing anything, not saying anything, just sitting on the lawn like a lost dog waiting for its owner to come home. My mother had eventually gone out to talk to him, to tell him I was gone and he needed to move on. According to her, he'd looked at her with empty eyes and asked when I was coming back. As if I'd just popped out to the store. As if I hadn't moved to another continent to escape the wreckage of our life. That night, I did something I probably shouldn't have. I called him. He answered on the first ring. "Sarah?" His voice was hoarse, desperate. "Is it really you?" "Hello, Michael. I hear you've been camping in my parents' yard. They're not running a bed and breakfast, you know." "I was hoping. I thought maybe you hadn't really left, that it was just a rumor, that you were still there and we could talk." "I tried talking, remember? You decided grabbing my ass was more important than actual communication." There was a long pause. Then, "I'm sorry. I've never broken up with someone before. I don't know how to do this." "Neither have I admitted. But I'm pretty sure sitting in my parents' yard isn't part of the process." "You didn't have to leave the country," he said. And now he was crying. I could hear it in his voice, the tears he was trying to hold back. "Yes, I did. You made your choice, Michael. You chose Patricia over me. You chose a hypothetical biological child over 23 years of real love. I hope you're all very happy together." "I made a mistake," he sobbed. "I'm sorry. We can work it out. We can adopt or do surrogacy or whatever you want. Please come back." "Those were always options," I said, feeling surprisingly calm. "I told you that from the beginning. But they weren't good enough for Patricia, and so they weren't good enough for you. Besides, she's going around calling me defective. How does that change?" "You're not defective," he said desperately. "I know you're not. I just spent some time in jail for defending you." That stopped me cold. "What?" Through his tears, he told me what had happened. He'd finally confronted Patricia about her behavior, about the way she'd been talking about me. The confrontation had turned into a screaming match, which had turned physical. He'd pushed her, or grabbed her, or something. The details were unclear. Robert had to pull them apart, and a neighbor had called the police. "If you'd done that when this all started," I said quietly, "I'd still be there. But it's too late now, Michael. Too late." He kept whispering, "I'm sorry," over and over, until I finally hung up. Marie found me crying in my room an hour later. She sat on the bed and held me while I told her about the call. "He made his choice," she said firmly. "Now he has to live with it. You don't owe him anything, chérie. Not forgiveness, not understanding, not a second chance. You owe yourself a future." She was right, of course, but knowing that didn't make it easier. Life in Lockdown Lion was strangely peaceful. With nowhere to go and nothing to do but wait, I had time to think, to process, to start rebuilding myself from the ground up. I cooked with Marie, played board games with the children, video called my parents daily, and slowly began to remember who Sarah was without Michael. I discovered I liked taking long walks by myself, something I'd rarely done before. I rediscovered my love of reading, devouring books in both English and French. I started writing in a journal, putting down all the thoughts and feelings I couldn't say out loud. Some days I wrote angry screeds about Patricia and her cruelty. Other days I wrote love letters to the Michael I'd lost, the boy who'd shown me the climbing tree and held my hand through every challenge. One evening, Marie's eldest asked me why I'd moved to France. Children have a way of asking the hardest questions in the simplest way. "My heart was broken," I told him honestly. "And sometimes when your heart is broken, you need to go somewhere new to fix it." "Is it fixed now?" he asked. "Not yet," I admitted. "But it's getting better." My parents kept me updated on the situation back home. Michael had moved back in with his parents after losing the house. He was drinking too much, according to the gossip network. He'd been caught drinking in the park and arrested for public intoxication. Patricia was telling anyone who'd listen that I'd ruined his life, that I'd cursed him somehow, that everything bad happening was my fault. "She's completely lost it," my mother reported during one call. "Robert's moved out. Half the family won't speak to her. The other half are afraid of her. It's like watching a soap opera, except it's real life." "It's not my fault," I said, more to convince myself than my mother. "Of course it's not, darling. Patricia lit this fire all by herself. Now she gets to watch everything burn." April in Lyon was beautiful. The trees bloomed, the cafes reopened with careful restrictions, and I finally had a video interview for a marketing position with an international company. It went well, though they warned it might be months before they could make any hiring decisions given the global situation. That same week, Michael called again. This time, Patricia's voice shrieked in the background before he could even say hello. "Leave my son alone!" she screamed. "Haven't you done enough damage?" I heard scuffling, then Patricia's voice directly in my ear. "You ruined his life, you defective bitch! He lost his job, his house, everything, all because of you. If I'd known 16 years ago what you were, I would have found him a normal girl, someone who could give him children, someone who wasn't broken." I hung up without responding. There was nothing to say to that level of hatred, but her words echoed. If I'd known 16 years ago, when Michael and I were 16 and I'd just been diagnosed, when he'd held my hand and promised we'd figure it out together, when Patricia had seemed like just an overprotective mother, not the monster she'd revealed herself to be, would things have been different if she'd known then? Would she have found a way to break us up before we'd built a life together? I wrote Michael a letter that night, an actual paper letter which I sent to my parents to deliver. In it, I told him I still loved him, because I did, despite everything. Love doesn't just evaporate after 23 years, but I also told him it was over, that he needed to move on, that I was building a new life. I told him to get help for his drinking, to find a job, to get his own place away from Patricia's poison. I told him I forgave him, even though I wasn't sure that was true yet. I ended the letter with, "Be the Michael I fell in love with, not the one who let his mother destroy us." Marie mailed it for me. I didn't trust myself not to tear it up. May brought tentative reopenings and a second interview with the company. My uncle drove down from Colmar to visit, offering to let me stay with him and his wife if Lyon became too expensive. The kindness of family was overwhelming. Everyone wanted to help, to heal the broken American cousin who'd fled across the ocean with a shattered heart. One evening, while I was helping Marie prepare dinner, my phone rang with Michael's ringtone. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "I just wanted to hear your voice," he said. "To know you're okay, to say hi." For a moment, it was like nothing had changed. We talked about the weather, about the pandemic, about mundane things. Then I heard it. Patricia's screech in the background. "Is that her?" "I have to go," Michael said quickly. "Michael, wait!" But Patricia had already grabbed the phone. What followed was a tirade that would have been impressive if it wasn't so pathetic. She blamed me for ruining Michael's life, for his job loss, which we'd known was coming for a year, for his drinking, which was his choice, for his arrest, also his choice, for Robert leaving her, definitely her own fault. She even blamed me for the fact that Michael had talked about suicide, saying there was no point in going on. That last part scared me. Despite everything, I didn't want Michael hurt. He was still the boy who'd shown me the climbing tree, even if he was buried under layers of bad decisions and maternal manipulation. I tried calling back, but Patricia answered every time, launching into new tirades. Finally, I wrote another letter. This one was shorter, more urgent. Told him I still loved him, that I wanted him to be okay, that life was worth living even when it hurt. I told him to get therapy, to get away from Patricia, to remember who he was before all this happened. "Please don't do anything permanent over something temporary," I wrote. "This pain will fade, you'll find love again, you'll have the family you want, just not with me." 2 weeks later, Marie told me gently that I needed to make a decision about my future. Her apartment was mine as long as I needed it, but she sensed I was stuck in limbo, neither fully here nor there, neither moving forward nor truly dealing with the past. She was right. I'd been existing in a bubble, pretending that if I just waited long enough, the pain would go away. and I'd know what to do next. But healing doesn't work that way. You have to actively choose it, every day, even when it hurts. I called my uncle in Colmar that night. The small town where I'd been born, with its medieval streets and half-timbered houses, suddenly seemed like exactly what I needed. Quiet, peaceful, full of childhood memories that predated Michael. A place where I could be just Sarah, not half of Sarah and Michael. "Come home," my uncle said simply. "Your room is ready." So in late May, as France slowly emerged from lockdown, I packed my few belongings and made the journey northeast to Colmar. Marie hugged me tightly at the train station. "You're stronger than you know," she whispered. "Remember that." The train ride through the French countryside was meditative, rolling hills, small villages, vineyards just beginning to show green. With each kilometer, I felt myself settling into something. Not quite peace. Not yet, but the possibility of it. Colmar was exactly as I remembered, and completely different. The tourist areas were empty, the usual crowds replaced by cautious locals. My uncle met me at the station, his mask not quite hiding his smile. "Welcome home, little one," he said, using the nickname from when I was truly little, before I shot up to 6 feet tall. His house sat on a quiet street near the old town. My aunt had prepared the guest room with fresh flowers and new linens. "Stay as long as you need," she said. Family is family. That first night in Colmar, I sat at the window looking out at the street where I'd learned to ride a bicycle, where I'd played hopscotch with the neighbor children, where life had been simple and Patricia didn't exist, and love lasted forever. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Michael's been readmitted to jail. Same issue with Patricia. Thought you should know." I turned off my phone and went to bed. The next months passed quietly. I found remote work with a translation company, my bilingual skills finally paying off. Walked the familiar streets of my childhood, bought bread from the same bakery my mother had frequented when I was small, slowly remembered what it felt like to be whole on my own. My father's health continued to decline, but he insisted on video calls every day. "Show me where you walked today," he'd say, and I'd turn the camera to show him the canals, the old buildings, the flowers in window boxes. "Beautiful," he'd always say. "Like you, ma petite. Beautiful." I made friends with other expats and locals. I joined a book club. I started playing tennis again at the local club, my serve rusty but improving. Slowly, carefully, I built a life that was just mine. Sometimes late at night, I'd think about Michael. Wonder if he was okay, if he'd finally broken free from Patricia. If he'd found someone new, someone who could give him the biological children he'd decided he needed. The pain was still there, but it had transformed from a sharp stabbing to a dull ache. Progress. In August, my mother called with news. Patricia and Robert's divorce had been finalized. Michael was in therapy and had been sober for 2 months. He'd found a job and moved into his own apartment. He'd asked about me, wanted to know if I was happy. "Why did you tell him?" I asked. "The truth," she said. "That you're finding your way. That you're healing. That you're discovering who Sarah is on her own." And what did he say? He said he was glad, and then he cried. I cried too, after we hung up. Not from sadness exactly, but from something. Relief, maybe, or recognition. We were both finding our way separately, becoming the people we might have been if we'd been braver, stronger, less willing to let others define us. September brought vendange, the grape harvest. I helped my father, Michael, living as he walked. Emma, the night I joined inside college. Great in it. Then I'm sometime would love. This is I am in a way free to in call. I love the woman. There's no, but I'm not disappeared. I'm not erased. I'm here in my childhood town, building a future I never expected, but have learned to love. I'm proof that sometimes the best revenge is simply living well. That sometimes the greatest love story is the one you write with yourself. To anyone reading this who's been called defective, who's been told they're not enough, who's had their heart broken by someone who was supposed to protect it, you are not broken. You are not less than. You are whole exactly as you are, and anyone who can't see that doesn't deserve you. Sometimes we have to travel thousands of miles to find ourselves. Sometimes we have to lose everything to discover we already have enough. Sometimes the person who tries to destroy us actually sets us free. I am Sarah. I am 6 feet tall. I cannot have children. I make excellent coco vin. I have a serves that makes grown men cry on the tennis court. I speak 2 languages fluently. I have loved and been loved. I have been broken and rebuilt myself. I am not defective. I am enough. And that, more than any wedding ring or white dress or happily ever after, is my victory.